The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a place where decisions were made quietly and lives were rearranged without ceremony. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, landing in pale rectangles on the floor. At the center of it all sat Marcus Hale, composed, confident, already victorious in his own mind. He didn't look at his wife, not once. Marcus had perfected the posture of a man who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. His tailored suit rested effortlessly on his shoulders. His hands were relaxed, folded loosely as if he were waiting for a delayed flight, not the legal erasure of a woman he had spent 14 years dismantling. Across the aisle, Elena Hale sat alone. No entourage, no whispered consultations, no legal theater. Just her, a straight-backed chair, and a slim, weathered folder resting on her lap. It was old. The edges had softened with time. The clasp was scratched, dulled from years of being opened and closed by careful hands. She kept one palm over it, as though it might drift away if she didn't. Elena's eyes stayed forward. She had learned long ago that meeting Marcus's gaze only fed him. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the final submissions. The case had moved quickly, too quickly. The numbers had aligned, the paperwork had flowed smoothly, and the narrative had already been written by better-funded attorneys and sharper suits. Marcus had made sure of that. He had stripped Elena of access before she even realized the doors were closing, accounts frozen under technicalities, properties transferred under obscure clauses, business holdings rerouted through shell entities bearing names she didn't recognize anymore. Each move had been legal, clean, invisible. That was Marcus's gift. He didn't break rules, he hollowed them out. He leaned toward his attorney, murmuring something that drew a small, satisfied smile. They had rehearsed this ending. The judge would speak, the assets would be allocated, Elena would leave with what the law allowed her to have, which was almost nothing, and Marcus would walk away lighter. The judge began to speak. Given the evidence presented, the court finds... Marcus shifted slightly, already anticipating the weightless relief of finality. Elena remained still. She remembered the first time Marcus had told her she was lucky to have him. They had been standing in a narrow kitchen years ago, when success was still a rumor and hunger had sharpened every word. He had said it gently then, as advice. Later, it became instruction. Over the years, he had taught her silence. He corrected her speech in public, praised her compliance in private, and reminded her that stability came from obedience. When the businesses grew, when the invitations multiplied, when their names appeared in places she had never imagined, Marcus made sure her presence faded. By the time the marriage collapsed, Elena had already been erased, or so Marcus believed. The judge's voice continued, methodical, precise. Each sentence felt like a door closing. Marcus's attorney nodded along, confident. There were no surprises left. They had accounted for everything. Everything except the quiet woman with the old folder. Elena felt the familiar weight in her chest as the legal language pressed down on her. She had been here before, metaphorically, moments where resistance seemed pointless, where survival meant enduring. But endurance had taught her something Marcus never learned. Silence is not emptiness, it is storage. She let her eyes drift just briefly to the folder. Inside were documents she had never mentioned, papers that predated the marriage, signatures that carried weight beyond balance sheets, a name that once frightened men like Marcus, back when reputation still mattered more than money. The judge paused, adjusting his glasses again. Marcus smiled. The judge prepared to finish the sentence that would end it all. Elena stood. The movement was subtle, almost apologetic, but it broke the rhythm of the room. Chairs creaked, heads turned. Marcus frowned for the first time, irritation flickering across his face. "Your Honor," Elena said. Her voice was calm, unembellished. It carried no plea, just presence. The judge hesitated. "Mrs. Hale, your counsel has already—" "I understand. I only need to submit one document." Marcus exhaled sharply, a quiet laugh escaping before he could stop it. He leaned back, crossing his arms, indulgent. Desperate gestures at the end were common. He had planned for theatrics. Elena walked forward. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of memory. She placed the folder on the clerk's desk with care, aligning it squarely, as if respect itself mattered. The judge glanced down, then froze. His hand hovered over the page. His eyes narrowed, not in confusion, but recognition. The air in the courtroom changed, tightening like a held breath. Marcus leaned forward. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp enough to draw a glance from the bench. The judge did not answer him. He looked at Elena instead, and for the first time that day, truly saw her. The judge's mouth opened to speak, then stopped, dead mid-sentence. The silence that followed was not empty. It was loaded. Marcus felt it before he understood it. Something had shifted. Something he had missed. Something that carried a name. The judge did not look up immediately. The courtroom waited. Marcus shifted in his seat, irritation hardening into something sharper. He had seen hesitation before, judges double-checking figures, clarifying clauses, but this was different. The silence wasn't procedural, it was evaluative. The judge turned a page, then another. Each movement was deliberate, almost careful, as though the paper itself required respect. His jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in calculation. When he finally looked up, his gaze did not go to Marcus or his attorney. It went to Elena. "Mrs. Hale," the judge said, slowly, "where did you obtain this?" Elena did not sit. She stood straight, hands folded in front of her, voice even. "It has always been mine, Your Honor." Marcus let out a dry laugh. "Your Honor, with respect, this is a divorce proceeding, not a history lesson." The judge raised one finger. Marcus stopped speaking. That alone sent a ripple through the room. Marcus had built his life on momentum, on talking faster, louder, longer than anyone else. Being silenced with a gesture felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable. The judge adjusted his glasses again. "This document predates the marriage by 6 years," he said, "and it names an entity that has not been disclosed in any filing before this court." Marcus's attorney leaned forward, brows knitting. "Your Honor, if there's an undisclosed asset—" "It is not an asset," the judge replied, voice cool. "It is a structure." The word landed heavily. Elena remained still. The judge continued, "Specifically, a private trust, established offshore, yes, but with domestic controlling authority retained by a single beneficiary." Marcus's smile faltered. His attorney turned toward him, whispering urgently. Marcus shook his head once, dismissive. He had trusts. Everyone at his level did. This meant nothing. Until the judge spoke the name. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. The name moved through the room like a pressure change, subtle but absolute. Several attorneys in the gallery stiffened. A clerk looked up, startled. Even the bailiff straightened unconsciously. Marcus didn't recognize the reaction at first. Then he saw his attorney's face drain of color. "That's not possible," Marcus said, standing now, control slipping into his tone. "That name has no standing here." The judge finally looked at him, and there was no warmth in his eyes. "On the contrary," the judge said, "it has standing everywhere." He turned back to the document. "This trust holds controlling interest in 3 of the shell entities listed in Mr. Hale's disclosures, entities that were presented as independently managed." Marcus's breath shortened. "Those companies were acquired after the marriage." "Yes," the judge said, "but the trust acquired them." Silence returned, heavier than before. Elena watched Marcus carefully. This was the moment she had imagined, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. He was recalculating, running numbers, searching for exits that no longer existed. The judge continued, "Furthermore, the trust includes a clause that activates upon marital dissolution under conditions of financial concealment." Marcus's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we object." "Sit down," the judge said. The attorney sat. The judge's voice remained level. That clause authorizes a full forensic audit and grants immediate cooperation rights to federal financial investigators. Marcus felt the room tilt. This court, the judge went on, is obligated to pause proceedings. He closed the folder. The sound was quiet, final. Marcus took a step forward. This is absurd. She had no involvement in those businesses. She signed, the judge said. Elena spoke for the first time since standing. Not as a wife, she said, as the beneficiary. Her words were not loud, but they were precise, each syllable placed carefully, like stones across water. Marcus stared at her, searching her face for deception, for triumph, for anything recognizable. He found none, only calm. The judge rose from his seat. This court is referring the matter for immediate review. Mr. Hale, you are instructed not to leave the jurisdiction. The gavel did not fall. It wasn't needed. As the courtroom dissolved into hushed confusion, Elena gathered the folder and held it close again. It had done what it was meant to do. It had stopped time. Marcus stood frozen, surrounded by people, suddenly alone, because the story he had written was no longer his. The fallout did not arrive loudly. It arrived methodically. By the following morning, Marcus Hale's name had been flagged across multiple financial systems. Accounts he believed untouchable were frozen pending review. Transfers scheduled weeks in advance failed without explanation. Phones that once rang endlessly went silent. By noon, 2 investigators waited in the corridor outside the courtroom. They did not rush him, they did not threaten, they simply asked him to sit. Marcus tried to speak with the confidence that had always rescued him before. He invoked misunderstandings, claimed clerical errors, suggested cooperation in exchange for time. They listened. Then they placed documents on the table. Copies, not Elena's originals, their own. The trust had done exactly what it was designed to do. It had watched quietly, recorded patiently, triggered cleanly. Every shortcut Marcus had taken, every shell, every concealed transfer, every assumption that silence meant ignorance had been cataloged. The investigation expanded beyond divorce. Tax exposure, fraud, obstruction. Civil court had become a doorway. Criminal court was the room beyond it. Marcus was not arrested that day. That came later. What happened first was worse. He was removed. Boards convened without him. Partners issued statements of temporary distance. Advisors who once dined at his table suddenly remembered conflicts of interest. His name disappeared from letterheads, websites, introductions. He still wore good suits. They just no longer opened doors. When the arrest finally came, it was quiet. No cameras, no spectacle. A simple warrant served in a parking garage beneath a building that no longer bore his name. Elena was not there. She did not need to be. In the final hearing, the court recognized the trust as separate, protected, and improperly encroached upon, he said. Full restitution will be ordered. Elena nodded once. That was all. She declined interviews, declined public statements. When asked why she had waited so long, she gave no answer. Those who understood did not need one. The folder returned to its place. Not hidden, retired. Months later, Marcus sat alone in a smaller courtroom, facing consequences he could no longer negotiate. The language was no longer financial. It was final. Elena never attended. Her victory was not in watching him fall. It was in never having needed to stand over him. The lesson did not spread loudly, but it spread completely. Power that relies on silence mistakes patience for weakness, and foundations built on arrogance collapse the moment truth speaks its name.
The collapse did not arrive with noise. It arrived with notifications. Accounts flagged, transfers halted, authorizations revoked. The systems Julian trusted more than people began rejecting him without explanation. By the time his phone stopped vibrating, he already understood what that silence meant. Evelyn had not taken anything. She had reclaimed it. Within 48 hours, auditors requested records Julian could not immediately produce. The structures he had layered for efficiency now demanded transparency. Each shortcut he had taken revealed another thread that led back to him. The investigation widened, not because of Evelyn's actions, but because of Julian's past choices. Deferred filings, aggressive valuations, internal memos written with the confidence that no one would ever read them aloud. Now they were being read carefully. Julian met with lawyers who spoke differently than before. Less assurance, more caution. Words like exposure and escalation replaced certainty. He tried to negotiate time. Time, he learned, was no longer his. When the formal notice arrived, it was brief. Assets frozen pending review. Travel restricted. Cooperation required. Criminal proceedings followed quietly. There were no cameras when Julian was escorted from his office building for the last time. No audience when his board voted unanimously to remove him. No sympathy when partners distanced themselves with statements drafted by people who once praised his leadership. The courtroom returned weeks later for the final ruling. Evelyn entered alone again. This time, the room felt different. The judge's tone was measured, unhurried. The findings were clear. The trust was valid. The concealment was documented. The attempt to erase it through marital dissolution had failed. Full control was restored. Julian did not look at Evelyn. He stared at the table in front of him, hands folded tightly, posture diminished. The man who once filled rooms now occupied as little space as possible. The judge concluded without flourish. "This court recognizes the integrity of preparation," he said, "and the consequences of arrogance." Evelyn stood.
She looked at Victor then. "You said it was unnecessary." Victor stood abruptly. "This is absurd. Those clauses were never intended to—" Calder spoke over him, gently. "Intent doesn't amend ink." The judge read, turned a page, then another. Color drained from Victor's face in increments, as if each line removed something vital. His confidence did not shatter. It thinned, became brittle. "These clauses," the judge said, choosing words carefully, "tie personal liability to undisclosed transfers." Victor's lawyer whispered urgently. Victor did not respond. Calder closed his folder. "There is more," he said, "but it extends beyond marital assets." The room seemed to lean forward now, no longer toward Victor. "Tax discrepancies," Calder continued, "false valuations, a pattern of concealment." The word pattern lingered. Mara returned to her seat. She did not look victorious. She looked finished. The judge called a recess, voice firmer than before. Court officers moved closer, subtle but unmistakable. Victor remained standing, hands braced on the table, eyes fixed on the folder now in the judge's hands, the object he had dismissed for years. Paper, ink, formalities, appearances he had assumed could never outweigh foundation. As the room cleared, Calder paused beside Mara. "You were precise," he said quietly. She nodded once. Outside the courtroom, a phone rang, then another. The machinery Victor had built began to turn in directions he no longer controlled. Inside, the judge sat alone with the documents, reading until the last line. Then she closed the folder and reached for the phone. The courtroom reconvened under a different gravity. The air no longer belonged to Victor Hale. He stood again, but this time the posture was forced, shoulders held in place by habit rather than confidence. His lawyers whispered urgently on either side of him, words colliding, strategies unraveling as fast as they were spoken. The judge did not look at him when she spoke. "These proceedings," she said, "are no longer confined to asset division." She paused, letting the meaning arrive without help. Based on the documentation entered into record and the testimony provided, this court is referring the matter for criminal review. Victor opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Calder stood once more, hands folded loosely. Court officers moved with quiet precision, positioning themselves just close enough to be seen, not close enough to touch. Not yet. Mara remained seated. She did not watch Victor. She watched the judge, the process, the thing that had always mattered more than appearances. The judge turned to her. "Miss Hale," she said, voice measured, "you entered this court without representation." "Yes," Mara replied. "And yet," the judge continued, lifting the folder slightly, "you have demonstrated extraordinary preparation." Mara nodded once. "I knew what was signed," she said, "and what was ignored." Victor's counsel attempted one last objection, voice strained, brittle. The judge cut him off. "Your client benefited from opacity," she said. "He will not be protected by it." She ruled then. Assets frozen, accounts flagged, properties placed under review, temporary control granted to the party who had disclosed fully, accurately, and on time. Mara. Victor swayed just slightly. The officer stepped forward. "This is not an arrest," Calder said calmly. "It is the beginning of oversight." Victor laughed then, a short, broken sound. "You think this ends me?" Calder met his eyes. "No," he said. "Your shortcuts did." The cuffs came later, quietly, in a different room, without an audience. News traveled faster than judgment. Boards convened emergency meetings, partners resigned preemptively, creditors called, deals paused, then vanished. The structure Victor had built looked impressive from the outside. From within, it collapsed like dry timber. Weeks later, the final orders were signed. Mara stood alone in the empty courtroom as the judge finished reading. Ownership transferred, liens resolved, authority restored not as revenge, but as correction. The manila folder lay on the table between them. The judge closed it gently. "You could have spoken sooner," she said. Mara considered the question. "Foundations take time," she replied. "Noise only delays them." Outside, the building hummed with ordinary life, people passing, systems working, indifferent to fallen men. Mara walked out alone. She did not look back. In time, Victor Hale became a case study, a warning spoken quietly in boardrooms, a name attached to phrases like compliance failure and willful blindness. Mara's name did not appear beside his. She returned to her work, consulted, advised, helped others read what they were asked to sign. The folder was archived, still intact, because power, she learned, is loud, but truth only needs to be documented once, and arrogance, given enough room, always signs its own ending.